It's Wednesday, November 9th, 4:40 p.m. The reason I'm saying all of this, the reason why I'm giving you such a precise time and date is been less than 24 hours since Donald Trump was declared president of the USA. Now, I'm in Canada, so does it affect me as directly as the States? No. Does it affect me somehow? I would imagine so. Am I really that much into politics? No, but certain aspects of it definitely are thought triggering to me, and conceptually there's so much that I personally like to explore. Now, the thing I want to talk about today, forwarding the generations, basically what step of evolution are we taking forward with our generation? What are we leaving off for the next one that's already started, really? You know, what trademark are we leaving behind for them to kick off of and forward their own generation? Now, there's so many points to this that I'm hoping to get to, because it really, I don't want to get too extensive with it, but I know it's going to be pretty elaborate. Basically, the whole started spinning off, for me anyways, when I was watching an interview with Donald Cowboy Cerrone, which, by the way, currently and for a while now has been one of my absolute favorite martial artists in quite a long time. You know, I always have the one guy who was probably recognized, you know, has some sort of trademark, but, you know, it's not as popular with everybody else as, you know, the one particular guy is to me. For instance, when the whole craze about Anderson the Spider Silva was going on, he did some real incredible things, but while everyone was jumping on his train and going on about the hype of him, you know, I was probably a little more in depth, controversially following the trend of guys like Chael Sonnen, or following the career of, you know, guys like the beginning stages of Rafael dos Anjos, or, you know, guys like that who probably weren't, you know, who had been probably fighting for a while, but didn't really, like, were probably only given a glimpse of time in the sun, and then kind of brushed off for then the big dogs to come in or whatnot. You know, guys like that I've always kind of followed heavily, because, you know, I'm always trying to look for the next big thing. So while everybody's been following, you know, the likes of, you know, John Jones and Conor McGregor, while these are very respectable guys and no sort of diminishing feelings towards them and their careers, Cowboy Cerrone is, you know, is definitely a huge influence on me, is definitely someone I'm following. And not just because of his fighting, but he has a lot of, like, outside activities that I really admire, and a lot of in-depth views on a lot of things that, you know, I probably never would have tapped into if it wasn't for him opening up my mind to it. So I definitely respect him in that regard. And so in watching an interview that happened not that long ago, he was talking about Donald Trump and why he voted for him, and what the views are on what his views are on the political state of things. And also he gave a pretty short spiel on basically this concept of forwarding the generations, you know. And I'm gonna touch a little bit on that maybe later on. And, you know, in the concept of forwarding the generations, to me it's the concept of either bettering or worsening certain aspects of the things that are evolving. Now, the raw definition of evolution is the adaptation of our surroundings as time goes on. How are we evolving? How are we moving forward? What are the things about us that are getting better? And what about us is getting worse? Now, there's so much I can say about this, because oh my god, where do I start? That there's so much about us that has gotten just so far down the drain that it's, you know, it's unreachable with just an arm. And that's a really descriptive way of saying, holy fuck, how did we get where we are now? Like, it's stupid. I definitely feel we're so much stupider in some regards. Now, is that my biased opinion of, you know, maybe we're not where I would like us to be? Maybe. Now, I'm going to read you a list of some of those life aspects that I want to touch on. And I'm going to break each one of them down a little bit if I'm able to get to them all. But I want to read you the list that I have. And I made this list just so, you know, I could get, you know, even if not all the ones I would like to brief on, but definitely a good chunk of them. In listing them from first to last, I kind of went on the main one and then kind of whatever ties into it, and maybe not dropping in level of importance, but basically in the order in which they connect, or whatever order they are as far as relevance. So here's the list. The aspect of success, economy, values, interpretation, intelligence, culture, morals, and ambition. And there's another one just towards the very end that I'm gonna leave off for a little while, just because it's not really a surprise, but it's one that I kind of want to end this segment on, just because it's kind of on its own thing. So if we're talking about success, now I know in a lot of these concepts are things we've talked about in the past, but it's something that I feel has relevancy to the whole concept of forwarding our generations. So in the case of success, you know, some, if not most people could argue that our success, depending on what you define it as, has dropped. The level of success, I personally believe that success has both dropped and escalated. As far as wealth, there's definitely a wider range of the levels of success that our generation is facing. However, I feel like there's a big, huge gap, at least comparatively to, well, you know, decades ago. Way back when, you know, there was a good bundle of unsuccessful and successful, even if you were looking at just, you know, wealth level or class or just, you know, financially, or whatever you want to put it on. But I just feel like today there's a bigger range. There's kids nowadays that are young and figuring out these really intelligent ideas and shooting for it and becoming really successful. Meanwhile, there's people who have let a good chunk of their life pass by, and then their ambition dies along with their strive, and they become unsuccessful. And there's an even bigger gap now to where, well, you're slightly successful, or you're just a little bit behind the next person. I feel like nowadays there's been such a gap created to where you're either stupid rich or famous or really relevant and everybody knows who you are, or you're so like stuck in the dirt that, you know, you just got washed away with every single one of like yesteryear's concept, or, you know, whatever it is. In the case of economy, the same deal. As far as success, there's quite a gap, and I feel like nowadays it's just so broken down into from broke to poor, and then there's just making it by, just getting by, just making it, just, you know, just getting through, and then there's overly abundant, too much money that you don't even know what to do with it. There's so much inconsistency, and depending on where you live and how the situation is, it's gonna vary. But the gaps of every single one of them are crazy. And depending on what your trade is or what your income source is, it's gonna vary from point A to point B drastically. And there's no middle ground. There's no gray area at all. As far as values, that's a whole topic in and of itself. But I feel like there's a small percentage of people that are waking up to realizing what true value is, what the true values are. And I'm not just talking as far as like priorities and the list of things that absolutely have to be met, but I'm just talking about values in life. And I know we've talked about that in the past, and unfortunately nowadays the concept of value is so vastly blurred out, especially as far as just the percentage of people who have really tapped in and discovered what the true meaning of value is. And it's something that I think is really only made prevalent once something drastic happens in one's world. And why is there a need for things to get hairy or things to get, for the situations to get sticky before we realize what our values and in our strive to meet our values. And then there's interpretation, the interpretation of life. Now this is one of the ones that I think we're a little, maybe we're not in the complete dark with this one, but we're definitely in a highly dim room at the very least, because our way of interpreting things, it's so narrow-minded that the whole thing about values and interpretation, it goes hand in hand. Here, let me give you a real good example of how nowadays a joke or a performance or entertainment isn't entertaining anymore. A joke isn't funny, and music is not good, and movies or books aren't entertaining unless they are related to drugs, violence, or sex. Some, if not all, can make the argument that those are some pretty great things. Granted, I'm not going to take away from that. I'm not into violence, but I understand that it has its place. I'm not going to say just go out and be a big old sex addict, but it has its place also. I'm not going to say don't do drugs, because to each their own. I'm not about to tell you guys how to live your life or what your self-medication should be, because I'm not your father. I'm not about to start telling you how to live your life or nothing like that. That's not what I'm here for. But the problem is, nowadays, unless a song has to do about that, like things today are hardly ever about celebrating life. Now, I'm not gonna say everything is like that, because there are some artists who still write about being strong, about having confidence, about having self-assurance, about having self-dominance, and being leaders in the world. So I'm not gonna say everybody does that, but a vast majority of the things that are projected, usually the things that get promoted on today's mainstream media, unless they are about those things, they just never get aired out. And so the whole thing about interpretation and values and the interpretation of what life should be and what it's about, that's what it's come to, unfortunately. That's not the only thing wrong with it, but that is a major point to it. That is one of the big, I would dare to say that's one of the big 4 or 5 points of what today's, what modern value or what modern interpretation is. So the next one is intelligence. This one is pretty controversial. Not just controversial, but it's also it's pretty contradicting in that the level of intelligence, the way that technology has been able to evolve, the way that modern level of expectation and modern today's bar for what standards are as far as intelligence is so far ahead than anyone thought it would be. It's literally, where we are today as far as technology, as far as advancement in knowledge and mental capability and all this stuff, and mechanical capability and electrical capability and all these physics related capability. Where we are today is where humanity thought we would be 50 years from now or 100 years from now. There's inventions coming out and already out there that man never thought it would reach until, millenniums later. And lo and behold, it hasn't even been 20 years before we progressed from, lace cassettes onto, gigabyte files and sharing technology and, just all these advancements that we have made, that we've been able to come up with. Now, on the contradicting side of that, we've begun to rely on this stuff so much that we've become lazy in progressing ourselves individually, and as a result, we're almost becoming dumber because we're too lazy to be able to advance ourselves. And as rude as that sounds, which it does sound rude, but it's also extremely truthful, the reason it's so bad, it's all because of we've become way too dependent on modern technology to think for ourselves. We really have, and it's stupid the amount we have fallen back because we have come so forward with our intelligence. We think to ourselves we're so smart, and because of that complacency, because of that type of conformity, we have also set ourselves back. And then that also leads into the next one, which is culture. Our culture is so, oh my God, everything from our closed-mindedness as far as our food goes, like our creativity with the kind of food we eat is so narrow-minded. Now, an argument can be made that we've also come forward as far as trying new things, but the limit we put on ourselves as far as what we consume is so two-dimensional, it's not even funny. Everything from the food to the music of all things, something so simplistic of as far as putting a beat and a melody together. Now, an argument could be made that there's only 2 kinds of music that ever has been, and ever will be, as far as there being good and bad music. Granted, I will totally give you that. Let's face the facts here. While a small percentage of us are actually advancing ourselves on culture because, well, we are looking back and pinpointing the attributes of what our cultures come from, what made the past so good. A good example is, the constant reminiscing about the 80s and what was so good about it. And it really was the overabundance of culture. So we're looking back and feeding off of what our past culture was, and B, looking how to forward our culture, not just keep it alive, but take it to the next level. who's to say what that is, but I feel like we're losing ourselves in the technology side of it, and I think they go hand in hand, because I think to really get joy in life, you really have to have a balance of the two, and it's a fine line. You don't want to stay stupid either. You don't want to have all this soul, you know, per se, and not want to advance. But I mean, if you're all hippie and fucking you're all into that whole trans stuff where you just, you know, you're tapping into a different level where you're zero technology whatsoever, then by all means, you know, do you. I'm not about to tell you how to live your life, but I think in order to really find the balance of the two, you kind of gotta keep up with the times, but at the same time, you can't completely lose yourself in modern advancement as far as what, you know, what the man or society perceives as. You know, you can't lose yourself in the movement, basically. It's all I'm saying. That's culture in a nutshell. I mean, there's so much more that I can go into as far as all that stuff, but it's a fine line. But the one thing you got to keep intact is for sure is the morals side of things. The morals is, you know, you basically, and it kind of all derives from the same thing as culture, in that you got to keep in heart, you know, the good things that you were taught as a youngster, and, you know, apply it to the new things you learn throughout life. You know, all the life experiences that you live by, and, you know, and you kind of got to make a combination of the two, because basically your morals are going to play part of the legacy. And we've talked about legacy before in some regard. Basically, what are your morals? What are the things that you're gonna leave behind, and, you know, what are the things you're gonna teach your kids if you in fact have any, or what are you gonna teach the new generation? What are, you know, the life lessons that you want people to, the things we live through. And I know for a fun fact that, you know, we all have our different struggles and our different life-changing moments and experiences, so that creates morals and things that we live by. So what's the overall message that you're gonna leave? What values are you leaving behind? What, you know, what are the things that you want people, the following generations, to care about? Basically, what do you care about? What do you want them to care about that you care about now? That's what it boils down to. And you gotta be realistic. You gotta be true to yourself. And there's something to be said about not living realistically. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. If one of your morals is hope, you know, you want the next generation to have hope, you want this generation to have hope, then you almost have to live fairly unrealistically. You have to have an unrealistic mindset in order to reach some pretty far ground. You know, you have to be able to reach for unreachable things. You have to live as if your reality are unrealistic things, because only that way will you progress to anything that's far-fetched. And all of a sudden, you know, the things that seem impossible all of a sudden seem possible. And that's all that hope is all about. When you look at faith, literally, you know, there's lots of scriptures that each one will word it differently, but what it's saying is you have to see things as if they are what they're not. Faith and hope go hand in hand in that regard. If you want to have hope for something, then you have to live unrealistically. It's a good balance of not facing reality, but at the same time facing reality in order to leave good morals behind. You know, if you can kind of draw your own conclusions based on that, then that's a pretty good start, I would say. And the last one, ambition. The whole talk about having faith and hope that we're able to reach something that seems far-fetched is something that, like I said before, it's there's such a gap, there's such a notable margin of the kind of people that have ambition nowadays. And ambition is a pretty broad word. For instance, the Spanish word tenaz is basically a really fancy word. You know, the direct translation is tenacity, tenacidad. Tienes que ser tenaz. You have to be tenacious. You have to be fucking stubborn, is what it's saying. You have to not conform to what reality is. The reality of things is you have to be respectful. You have to be appreciative and honoring of what the people before us left. But you have to be stubborn in accepting the fact that you're not going to stay stuck in that past, and you're not going to stay stuck in now. It's good to live in the now. It's good to evolve the now, but you have to push to not be stuck in it. You can't look in the future because it's impossible to determine it. But you can accept and push forth the idea that tomorrow is not going to be the same as today because you are acting today. That's ambition. But that's only the start of it. I'm not going to go, and excuse the language, I'm not going to go balls deep into it because I wouldn't have enough time in this podcast for it. But I would like to leave that thought in your head so that at least it's a stepping stone, you know, and it's good to sort of dwell on that and build your own conclusions on what you want. You know, forget about tomorrow and focus on today. Now, if you want to push it a little bit, think about later today. What's today going to comprise of? What's forward for you later today? And it basically ties into so many of the things that we've been talking about previously. So much of what we talked about taking little steps and small accomplishments leading on to something big, and it's all relevant. I'm not, you know, mapping it out so it all fits on the same map. I'm not, you know, trying to make it out to be some big series or whatever. But if you look at it, it really is relevant. There really is power in the people to affect certain things. Now, I'm not going to get all political and start talking about the election. It really is relevant the way that, you know, everybody thought Hillary was going to take the presidency because of how good she was doing. And then all of a sudden, all these controversial conspiracies were coming up about how the whole thing is set up, how the whole thing was fixed, how she had like all these crazy agendas that were far shadier than what Trump had going on. And so people started acting on it. And then all of a sudden there was this huge turnaround. And then by the time the tallies started coming in, you know, all of a sudden, boom, 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 you know, the underdog, in huge quotations, underdogs, massive bunny ears with my fingers here, underdog ended up taking the gold, ended up taking the spot. And I know now there's like all this drama about people being unhappy with the result, yada yada yada. Trust me, it's all going to pass, because, you know, and I'm not gonna get into it, but it will pass. I know that for a well incarnated 200% fact. I'm dead sure of that. The point of all of this, and there's some more stuff that I want to talk about. Now, I do want to spend some time talking about education. My personal definition of education is not necessarily how much you have studied. Because to me, education is how far have you come. There's people far ahead of graduates that never made it to post-secondary and are far smarter and are far readier for life, that are younger than them, that are less prepared, in quotation marks, that are far more educated. Their manners are there, their ambitions are there, their preparation as far as facing life is there. Probably like that dweeb from Good Will Hunting said, well, I have a degree. Well, fuck you and your degree. okay, I'm not going to take away from the fact that people put in a lot of hard work to chase their careers and put in blood, sweat, and tears into their stuff, and great. But where is that putting you? How is that advancing you in life? Is it going to give you a career that's going to make you a lot of money and that's your dream? Great. I'm proud of you. Where is your preparation as far as everything else? Where is your furthering as far as everything else? Where, you know, I know people, and I'm not going to name names because I'm not about to start throwing dirt at them. And unfortunately, it's more than one person that I know like this, where they went to school all their life. They studied for a long time. They cemented themselves in their careers. They advanced themselves so far as far as studies and degrees and scholar preparation and academic points to be reached and all this stuff. And they reached their 40s and they never left home and they never got married and they never, you know, they never got themselves a decent working little car, and they never, you know, they never chased anything else in life. Granted, it's pretty good that they put that much focus, that, you know, they zeroed in on it and left everything else behind in order to chase it. Great. That's a pretty good concept, but where did that put you as far as everything else? Did you for 1 minute, you know, metaphorically lift your head up to see what was going on around you, to see what else, you know, what sidestep you needed to take in order to not be left behind on everything else? And then, you know, once you were at a comfortable point, once you reached your target, what were the things you had to resolve to in order to, you know, play catch up on all the other things? And I'm not bashing anyone. I'm really not. I'm just, these are all concepts of things, on things I've probably been guilty of myself. But I've seen it more prevalently as far as the more obvious things with some people, and reaching 40s and 50s and never knowing how to get ahead as far as the basic things in life, because they engulf themselves a little too heavily in their academics and all this stuff. And so education, how are you educating yourself? How are you preparing yourself for life? I kind of want to touch on a debate I was watching not that long ago, and I'll leave a link on the description box. It's a pretty cool debate. Well, the whole thing is millennials versus old school, you know, politicians and old school generations, you know, millennials making a case for themselves, how they're not just a lazy bunch of pricks and you know, these lazy ass motherfuckers. And the debate was basically making arguments back and forth about, you know, why the millennials are getting this bad rep, and how true is it, or what level, you know, what percentage of it is true, and why it is, and why, you know, why they are getting such dirt slung on them. Do I agree with a lot of it? Fuck yeah. But, you know, the young ladies that were representing the millennials, they made a lot of valid points. And basically, some of the things that were agreed upon definitely struck a note with me, and I agree with a lot of it. The big point that I got from it, being academically prepared and all that stuff, that type of education is basically, it's not what separates, you know, the ambitious and the hardworking individual from the lazy and the technologically conformed young person. It's, you know, that's not what separates the hungry youngsters from the lazy motherfuckers that want to live at home mooching off their parents. You know, you guys really should watch that debate. It's I recommend it for everyone. Even the slightly comical introduction, it's pretty spot on. As much as it's the politicians and the man per se that criticizes the generation for being what they're critiquing it to be, I believe that it's the man itself that it almost thrives on a plateau. It almost wants us to leave off on a certain note. It almost wants us to reach a certain threshold and not raise it by any means. You know, it almost puts a limit on how far the up-and-comers get in order to keep them wealthy, in order to keep itself at a certain level, because once we recognize how much we can surpass them and do something about ourselves, then all of a sudden it becomes a threat to the man. One of the points that was made in the debate was that opportunities nowadays really is about who you know. Like, you could be a total dumbass working for a really successful company and making a shitload of dollars. Meanwhile, there's a really smart kid having to work at McDonald's just so he can go to school because he doesn't know he doesn't have a whole lot of connections. And that's so sad. And that whole same thing could be said about, you know, every other job. And I can speak for myself in as far as the construction industry. You know, there's some kids who's probably a nephew or some little buddy of the boss and is getting promoted to assistant manager. Meanwhile, he's giving orders to some guy who's been in the industry for years, has out-experienced him by years, and knows so much more than he does, and produces so much more than the stupid dumbass. But meanwhile, it's because he knows the boss that, you know, because he brown noses and knows somebody that knows the boss, that he's been able to get where he is. Meanwhile, everybody else is busting their hump just to keep their job. Unfortunately, that's the way it works nowadays. That's part of the man keeping us thinking that we're moving ahead, but at the same time thinking we're catching up to them. But when all in reality, you know, we're underneath their heel. You know, a good analogy is the stuff we were talking about a couple days ago, where we're conforming ourselves to what society wants us to be, because we're basically getting tricked as far as addictions and all this stuff, and doing all these artificial relieves and having all this artificial happiness. And what I mean is, now I'm not gonna start taking jabs at people that drink or that do drugs or whatever, because truth be told, I used to do drugs myself, and I always enjoy the occasional glass of scotch or some fancy liquor every so often, because it's a good enjoyment. But the people who are definitely stuck in a vicious cycle, you know, it's basically they're getting tricked into thinking they're living it up. Meanwhile, they're slowly killing themselves faster than we're already dying. It ties into conforming ourselves with the second name. If you don't know what that is, tune in. You should probably check out an earlier podcast that I did. And it also ties into giving up our time, which is another podcast I did. If you guys wanna listen into to that one, I definitely recommend it. But it all has to do with the plateau that man is trying to keep us at. You know, just the way I think the elections were fixed. You know, if you as hard as, you know, YouTube or whatever it was, the the government was trying to take down all those videos about how people were discovering that the debates and the elections were fixed for Hillary to win and all that stuff. You know, it goes to show you that, you know, how many supporters did Hillary not have? And it wasn't until people were starting to find out how dirty she was playing it and how dirty her agendas were, that people started voting, you know, started siding with Trump just to start kicking back at her. And it goes to show you something right there. You know, it goes to show how in her pocket she had everybody, or just how in their pocket the man has society. Now I'm gonna roughly quote something that I heard in the interview, and I thought was pretty interesting. I'm not gonna quote it because I don't have the quote with me. But if you go to check it out, you'll probably know what I'm talking about.